All right, I see everybody starting to jump on. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It is right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this session off. Welcome to July's Leadership Education and Development session. Today we are focusing on ICD 705. We are happy to welcome Daniel Garcia, who's a managing partner with Precision Security Consulting. Just a couple quick call outs before I turn it over. First, I'm going to turn it over to Marquez, who will then turn it over to Daniel. As a reminder, we record these sessions. This will be available on our LMS, which is ECC University, for any rebroadcast, any rewatches that anybody would like to do if you need to share this information with other teammates. You have the ability to ask questions. However, I would like to request to please pop your questions in the chat or save those questions till the end. We do have a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to pop those questions if they're at the top of your head and you don't want to forget them right into the chat, and we'll make sure to answer them before we're done. Otherwise, we will have that dedicated session before we close out our session today. All right, with that being said, I want to turn it over to Marquez, who's just got a couple of remarks, and then we will get our learning underway. Marquez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks again, everyone, for showing up. I just wanted to stress the importance of ICD 705 as we continue to pursue.
No worries, Marquez. The audio is kind of going in and out. I don't know if maybe you want to type up just a couple of things and pop them in the chat. That way everybody will get it. I know Marquez was going to emphasize the importance of ICD 705, how it impacts our projects. So Marquez, if you don't mind popping that into the chat, just a couple of words to get us started, I will turn it over to Daniel. Daniel, welcome to ECC.
Hey, thank you. Sally, thank you again for coordinating all of this, and Marquez, appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this training session for the ECC team. Thank you. My name is Daniel Garcia. As Sally mentioned, I am a managing partner with Precision Security Consulting. SCIF Guide is the education division of our little company, and a little bit about me. My background in security was in law enforcement. I was medically retired, and I'm now doing this full time. I've had the opportunity to consult on over 150 SCIF, SAPF projects of all kinds of various types of projects, from small little rooms to huge facilities, which are always exciting. I've also had the opportunity to be an RF and acoustic technician, providing the technical testing for some of those systems. So a little bit about me there. This course is an ICD 705 introduction course. It's a part of a larger course, a 3-day course that we teach. These are the additional modules that I cover in that 3-day course. Again, this little module here is the kickoff of the 3-day course. Unfortunately, because we don't have time for the 3-day course here, I will be kind of somewhat assuming either you have knowledge of some of these other modules, or that would be in the class taking the modules, so I won't have the opportunity to really drill down into some of the subjects that get mentioned in this introduction. But hopefully, again, as an overview, this will be beneficial for all of you guys. So the learning outcomes for this, we're going to look at the definition of a SCIF and a SAPF, kind of an overview of the federal oversights that's involved with ICD 705, as well as really the core of this training is a summary of the policies that are involved with ICD 705. By way of a general introduction, these projects whenever you're involved with an ICD 705 project, it's really governed by, there's a lot of players involved, a lot of federal agencies, there's a lot of policies and security standards that are a part of these projects. And so even if you have experience with commercial construction, or maybe you even have a background in security, whatever your level of experience in this world is, if you haven't been a part of an ICD 705 project, it would be a splash of cold water, so to speak, because these projects offer some fairly unique challenges, some unique hurdles that could be introduced into a typical commercial construction project. And so it's definitely important to be aware of the policies and the standards and to really follow them as strictly as possible. And something that we like to remind for ourselves and for everyone, at the end of the day, the end goal for an ICD 705 project is that we're protecting our nation's secrets, the U.S. government, our information, and our warfighters, our personnel that are out there. ICD 705 is geared towards protecting, again, the data, the information, the national secrets, and our people. So whenever frustrations may come, or, man, I can't believe we've got to do it this way because of these standards, that frustration is all worth it at the end of the day because of the high level of importance that these spaces are involved with. So let's look at what a SCIF and a SAPF, what they are. So a SCIF, that stands for a Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, and a SAPF is a Special Access Program Facility. So as you may already know, the government has all kinds of different classifications of information. You have secret, top secret. You also have SCI, and SAP. So SCI information, that's another caveat to those classifications, gets segmented off and requires, if a program or information or mission gets classified as SCI or SAP, then it's going to require that anytime that information is stored, it's discussed, or it's electronically processed, say you've got data systems coming into a space, then any of that information that's SCI or SAP is going to have to be conducted in a facility, in a building that has been designed and built to the standards involved with ICD 705, IC Tech Spec 1.5.1, and some other policies that we'll be touching on here shortly. So at the the top of the food chain in terms of the federal oversight that's involved with ICD 705 project is the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. This organization sets the security policies for intelligence-related information, first organized in the National Security Act in 1947. And then really in 2004, it kind of got somewhat of a rebranding, so to speak, as a result of the 9/11 attacks that occurred. There was, a lot of investigation and research that went into that. And so the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act really consolidated and gave the ODNI additional authority, ultimately giving them authority to issue binding directives, ICD 705 being one of those directives. Part of what they do, they provide national intelligence to the president and to various other important folks there. They ensure the accuracy of the intelligence that's derived from all kinds of sources that they have going on. Oversees program management. They oversee program management jointly with the DoD. They assist all other cognizant security agencies, which we'll look at here secondly, in their intelligence activities. And they also, again, they author the Intelligence Community Directive and standards, and they're the ones that have the authority to make them binding for agencies. So a cognitive security agency, this may be a term that you might see or hear if you're involved in ICD 705 project. They could also be referenced as a CSA. So Cognizant Security Agency, they're going to be the agency that is going to ultimately oversee the accreditation of an ICD 705 space. So an example of this is Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. DIA, they provide the security oversight for all of the DoD SCIF spaces. So if it's an Army, a Navy, whatever organization that is in the DoD having a SCIF space, it's the DIA that would be overseeing the intelligence aspect of that, and ultimately the facilities accreditation. You have other CSAs, the NSA, NGA, NRO. So again, these are all the various CSAs that may be either an end user or, again, providing the oversight of an ICD 705 project that you may be involved with. So let's dive in here to some of the policies here. The ultimate one, the umbrella, the head of the lineup here is the Intelligence Community Directive 705, ICD 705. This is the policy that establishes that all SCIFs shall comply with the uniform physical and technical security requirements, ensures the protection of sensitive compartmented information. Again, remember that's SCI. Foster efficient, consistent, and reciprocal use of SCIFs in the IC. We'll dive into reciprocal here in a second, what that means and the importance of that. And then also the ICD 705 directive applies to all facilities accredited by the various IC elements where SCI is processed, stored, used, or discussed. The policy, kind of a general overview of what it talks about. All SCI must be processed, stored, used, or discussed in an accredited SCIF. Important there being accredited. All SCIFs shall comply with the uniform security requirements. So again, ICD 705 is providing a foundation or a basis for the minimum security requirements that are required for a SCIF or SAPF. All SCIFs shall be accredited prior to being used as an operational space. So you can't be doing any kind of SCI work until the space has been accredited with its final accreditation. The intelligence community element head may accredit, re-accredit, and de-accredit SCIFs. It's giving them the authority to do this. And a role that you would hear a lot about if you're involved in an ICD 705 project is the AO, the accrediting official. This is the person that has been delegated the authority to oversee the facilities, making sure that the design and the construction are in compliance with ICD 705, ultimately with the view of getting that space operational with its final accreditation. So again, that's the AO, who is a very important role in an ICD 705 project, and this policy gives them the authority to do so. The IC element head may grant a waiver pursuant to a document mission need, and waivers need to detail the mission need and specific deviation from the requirement. So just as quickly to explain a waiver as an example could be ICD 705 requires a specific set of door hardware, let's say. It has to meet a certain standard to install this door hardware in your perimeter doors of a SCIF. Well, let's say your project, for some reason, this door hardware is back-ordered everywhere, you can't find it, but the space needs to be operational by a scheduled time. And so what may be allowed is the AO may allow your project to install a substandard set of door hardware for a brief period of time, and you would detail, the reason why you're not installing the standard hardware, and that it's only for this brief period of time, and that you're protecting the doors by doing some additional practices. So you would establish SOPs, and you would submit that, and hopefully would be granted a waiver, again, for a short period of time until you were ultimately able to install that standard hardware. So again, that's just an example of what a waiver is and why it would be needed. All SCIFs shall be constructed, operated, and maintained for reciprocal use by IC elements. Again, we'll discuss reciprocity here in a second. But at least here in this overall policy, it's allowing for this idea of reciprocity to be occurring for SCIFs and SAPFs. SCIFs that fall under chief or mission authority. Chief or mission authority, that means essentially Department of State, places that are or embassies, say, that have a SCIF or a SAPF in them, they not only will they be complying with ICD 705, they're also going to have to comply with Overseas Security Policy Board Standards, OSPB. So again, if you're overseas and you're building an embassy, there's another set of standards along with ICD 705, but another set of standards that you would need to be aware of and following. The Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Policy Plans and Requirements shall maintain an inventory of all SCIFs. So this is known as the SCIF repository. Every SCIF or SAPF facility has a database in which every SCIF is given an ID number as well as all of the applicable information for that space, and they're keeping track of all of those spaces. Just as a note, DoD Manual 5205.07, titled the SAP Security Manual, identifies ICD 705 series of directives and standards as applicable to the safeguarding of SAP information. So earlier when I was mentioning, SCIF and SAPF, there are differences of those, the differences being the classification of the information. However, a SAPF and a SCIF, they're both accredited and designed and built to the same standards. In my time of consulting, I've heard sometimes some folks in the past may say, oh, this is just a SAPF. It's not as strict as a SCIF. I've heard it also in the reverse. Oh, this is just a SCIF. It's not as stringent as a SAPF. But the reality is that both of these spaces have to be designed and built. They have the same requirements to be built to ICD 705. So regardless of the classification, SCI or SAP, it's going to be built to the same set of standards. And ICD 705 acknowledges that for SAP, and the DoD manuals for SAP acknowledges that for the ICD 705. Here's another related policy. This is the ICS 705-1, Intelligence Community Standard 705-1. Here, where ICD 705 as the broad umbrella policy, ICS starts getting a little bit more specific. It identifies more specifically the uniform physical and technical security standards for all SCIFs. It's a standards designed to achieve reciprocity across the IC. So reciprocity, again, just to briefly mention it here, it's intended to promote information sharing. So one of the main things that the 9/11 investigations found was one of the layers or one of the reasons why that attack was successful was due to a lack of various IC elements not sharing information, either not being able to share due to policies and various things like that. Well, ICD 705 steps in and says these facilities are built, all of them have to be built to the set of standards. Therefore, all of the various agencies should be able to come in and share that information. So again, ICD 705 is trying to create an environment in where sharing is occurring. So this ICS 705 also ensures that the AO applies an analytical risk management approach to the planning, design, and construction. Now, again, this is one of those ones where we have a whole nother module on the analytical risk management, so I can't dive into it too much here, but just to mention that this process is a key component to an ICD 705 project, where ICD 705 develops the minimum standards for a SCIF or SAPF. The AO, the site security manager, various security players or stakeholders would be involved in this analytical risk management process. That's where they're going to evaluate each and every SCIF or SAPF as a program, a mission, the location. They're going to identify threats and vulnerabilities, and from there they can, from the basis of ICD 705, they can increase the standards or the requirements that are going to be imposed on that project. And so really this analytical risk management process makes every SCIF or SAPF project stand on its own. You really can't take one SCIF experience. Say you were involved in a SCIF build last year in a location with a group of customers, and you successfully got that space operational and accredited, and then you're involved with another SCIF and another location, another group. You really can't just simply import that experience and say, oh, we did all of these things here at this time, at this location, and then do the same here. You may have some overlap. You're likely to have a lot of overlap, but you could have some unique requirements based off of the AO's analytical risk management process here. So again, it's just a very important component of an ICD 705 project. The ICS 705-1 also identifies some of those requirements for planning and design. Further identifies specific requirements for physical and technical security standards. An example of this may be it will say something like the conversations, the audio of a SCIF space are required to meet acoustic standards or acoustic requirements. It will provide guidelines for waivers, identifies the various roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. I've mentioned AO. There's also the CTTA, or the Certified Tempest Technical Authority. There's a Site Security Manager. There's various roles that could be involved in an ICD 705 project, and ICS identifies those roles and responsibilities. It also mentions or references the use of the IC technical specifications for construction and management of SCIFs. We call this the tech spec for short, or IC tech spec. Again, we mainly call it the tech spec, which we will be covering here in a second. The next policy that we want to look at real quick is the ICS 705-2. That one that we were just looking at was -1. This is ICS 705-2. This is really primarily focusing on accreditation and reciprocity. Establishes the policy for these things, and just a brief quote here: accreditation is the beginning of a life cycle process of continuous monitoring and evaluation, periodic reevaluations, and documentation reviews to ensure a SCIF is maintained in an accredited state. So, and then just a note here, accreditation, that process begins at the very beginning of a concept phase. So before you or I would ever get involved with a SCIF or SAF project as part of designers, consultants, engineers, construction specialists, the accreditation process has already begun long before we ever jump into this project. And so it's good to be aware that you're jumping into a process that has already begun, and that's why it's important to quickly become aware of what are the general requirements of the ICD 705 project, but then also to find out if there are any additional requirements that the AO has imposed. I mentioned that analytical risk management. So you may have, say for example, it's quite common for SCIF SAPF projects to have an additional requirement for U.S. citizens only to be involved in the design and construction of a project. And so if that's a requirement, it would be important for that to be followed from, again, beginning to end. And so it's again, the accreditation process begins from the very beginning, and it runs all the way through until the life cycle of that facility, until ultimately that it may be de-accredited at the end of its life cycle. The inspections and evaluations shall be performed by the AO or a designee prior to final accreditation. So again, this is an important part of the accreditation of the facility, is that you would have the AO or somebody that's been designated to provide the evaluations or the oversight of the space. They could potentially be there every day of construction, or they could be attending all of the meetings, or they could do periodic inspections or evaluations. Every project has a different level of involvement by them, but this policy is establishing that someone from that team is going to evaluate and inspect that space before it gets finally accredited. This policy also requires reviews of all documents related to design, construction, and operation. That means they're supposed to be evaluating, say you're in the design process, they're supposed to be evaluating the key design milestones of that process and ensuring that the space is in compliance with ICD 705. Same thing with construction. They may be they're going to be reviewing the specific specifications or submittals that could be related to ICD 705, the security operations during the construction of the space. They should be reviewing, they're required to review all of that type of documentation and physically evaluating the spaces as well. I mentioned earlier the CTTA. ICD 705 also requires a CTTA. Again, this is the Certified Tempest Technical Authority. It's an important role that's involved with these spaces. They're supposed to review and verify the tempest countermeasures that are going to be required for these spaces. So again, if you don't have, or if you haven't heard that a CTTA is involved in your project, it's an important component to make sure that they're on board with the project. Now, you may or may not have any interaction with the CTTA. They're often behind the scenes interacting with the AO, but their involvement in the project, behind the scenes or not, is a very important component of the accreditation of that facility. And just quickly, Tempest is related to the protection of radio frequency signals, that keeping them inside the space, making sure that bad actors aren't able to siphon off or gather any of the intelligence off of those signals that are supposed to be contained within that SCIF, and that's a main component of what a CTTA does. Tempest countermeasures are different than our next bullet point here, TSCM. Technical surveillance countermeasures. TSCM, this is more, let's say, it's bug sweeping, so to speak. That's a special type of equipment that's going to inspect, or we say would sweep a space or a facility to see if there are any devices that have been planted during construction, and finding those things and getting them out. A TSCM sweep or inspection is only going to be required when the AO deems that necessary. And this is likely not going to be something that you or I would ever be aware that it was required or not. And we certainly most likely would not ever be aware that it was conducted or not, or when it was conducted. It's something that they're going to be doing behind the scenes, and it's not something that they typically broadcast that would be conducted. This policy also establishes the ability for reaccreditation based off of being able to update a space to current standards. There was an old set of standards called the DCID 69 or JFAN 69 that spaces previously were built to, and there's still some of those spaces that are operational today that have been grandfathered in, which right now we're kind of somewhat in a time period where that grandfathering is sunsetting, and a lot of these spaces are getting deaccredited and being required to upgrade to the current standards. But a space that could kick off reaccreditation would be, or a scenario could be major modifications. Maybe the program gets some changes to the sensitivity of that program, or new threats are identified, and so the AO could impose new construction requirements to protect the space, and so that would again trigger a reaccreditation process. This policy also allows for SCIFs that have been deaccredited but maintained at a secret level, so there would be alarms and locks and things like that for that space. But for less than 1 year, that space could be reaccredited as a SCIF. This policy identifies reciprocity occurs when there is a requirement for sharing of an accredited SCIF, a compartment, a program, a special activity. So you could have essentially various IC elements. Say we have a space that has been accredited and operational for the Navy. The Navy say they have a SCIF space, and then you also have the Army, that they have intelligence community activities that need to come and be a part of that space. They could have a room that would be considered a compartmented area for them, but they're going to be able to play in the same sandbox, so to speak. They're going to be able to operate in that same facility. Well, this policy allows for these different elements, these different agencies to come in and work inside the same space. And again, this would be considered reciprocity, the two agencies working together inside of the space. And so the agency, say the Army, just to use this example, is going to be operating inside that space. They're going to have an accreditation for their compartmented area that would need to be accepted by all of the IC elements, and it wouldn't be accredited, or they wouldn't be allowed to operate in there if there were, or not likely to operate in there if there were waivers to the space, or if there's some type of substandard construction that occurred. It's not likely they're not going to operate inside this space. But again, this is establishing that as long as there's no waivers, that the space has been built to ICD 705 standards, then they're going to be able to operate together inside this space. This would be considered also a co-use agreement. This policy is requiring that an agreement is established, a formal agreement would be established between, again, using my example here, it would be between the Navy and the Army, the Navy as the host and the Army as the tenant of the space. There would be a formal agreement that they would formalize. Co-use is considered joint use when the tenant wants to use the host information system. So that facility that the Navy built, they have their SCIF and they have their information systems that they're operating off of. And so if the Army needs to come in and they want to use those very same systems, then that co-use agreement would include a joint use component of their agreement. Now, co-use agreement is not required when the SCIF is being shared by two or more of the components under the same cognizance. So again, say we have the Navy, that's their facility, and we have a different IC team that they're still the Navy, they're still under that CSA of the Navy. Just because they're a different team, it doesn't mean that they have to use a different or utilize a co-use agreement. As long as they're under the same CSA, they can utilize that space without the need to go through the formal co-use agreement process. If modifications are required by a tenant, then the tenant shall bear the cost. So let's say that the Army comes in, they want to use the Navy space, but the Army has increased requirements for, say, Tempest. They want to have a higher performance out of their radio frequency attenuation. And so they couldn't come in and say, hey, Navy, you have to build us a room that has better performance. The tenant would come in and say, hey, we'd like to operate inside your space, but we need to do some improvements, and we're going to bear the cost of that. The use of physical, visual, and acoustic separation required for co-use agreements when not all personnel briefed into all respective programs. So what this is identifying is that essentially you could have personnel that have their clearance allows them to operate inside of the SCIF, so they can come in and out, they're operating inside of that SCIF, but there may be additional parts of that program or that mission that they don't have a need to know, or they're just not briefed into certain parts of that. And so there could be other areas of that SCIF that have been, let's say we have a compartmented area, which would be, say, an office or another conference room that would have special access control established on that one room. And that person who's not briefed into that one little segment, they wouldn't go inside that space. And so if that compartmented area is like that and they're trying to create that separation, well, then that room would need to utilize some physical, visual, and acoustic separation that would be included in the design. So the wall type of that particular room may be different than the other interior rooms of that space. Physical, Tempest, administrative telephone, and TSCM requirements apply to the host SCIF also apply to the compartmented area. So again, let's say we have our Navy, they're going to come in to the Army is going to come in and operate into the Navy space. The Army has a compartmented area. They have a special room that they're utilizing. They can't excuse themselves from a requirement that the host facility, the Navy's facility, has imposed on them. They can't say, oh, well, we don't want to do X, Y, and Z. They can't do that. If it's imposed on the host facility, then they are going to have to follow that requirement as well. SAPFs built to ICS requirements shall enable reciprocal use across all IC elements. Again, this is, I mentioned the DoD manual acknowledging ICD 705. Here, ICD 705 is acknowledging SAPFs in terms of that they're both intended to be operating off of the same set of standards and allowing for reciprocity. So here, the IC tech spec, here this would be, I would say, is going to be your bread and butter if you're involved in the design and construction of a SCIF or SAPF. The tech spec is going to be your Bible, so to speak. It's going to be the manual that you'll utilize that has the most in-depth information as it relates to ICD 705, and it's going to just provide more detailed information. When the IC tech spec was created, it was established to supersede DCID 6.9 and JFAN 6.9. I mentioned that earlier, as those were the older set of standards that these spaces were built to. Those standards had much less construction requirements in terms of how the wall types were built, for example. And so the IC tech spec comes in and supersedes those standards. This tech spec was prepared by the National Counterintelligence and Security Center under the ODNI. It is designed to be a living document, so that means that it does change, it can change, it will change. Right now we're currently in version 1.5.1, which was kicked off in July 2021. The word on the street is that we're going to see a new iteration of the tech spec any day now. That's been the rumor for the last year or so we'll see. But there is supposedly a new iteration coming out, whether that's called 1.6 or 1.5.2, I don't know. But the main point is the tech spec can change and does change. And typically they'll say if your space, let's say your project has started and design has started, construction has started, and it was being designed and built to the technical specifications identified in 1.5.1. If the new iteration comes out, it's not like they're going to, or typically they're not going to make you go back to redesign the space and undo construction or anything like that. Usually it's based off of the iteration that you were designing and building to at the time of that iteration. The tech spec was developed as a collaborative effort between various IC elements, private industry, construction professionals. They're part of a working group called the PITSWIG. And they continue to work and are the main working group involved in creating the new iterations that would be coming out in the future. The tech spec is relatively large in terms of some of these other policies, and so this is just kind of a brief overview of some of the categories that the tech spec addresses. Accreditation, it also establishes SCIFs must be formally approved before use. Physical security, it's going to address the fortified perimeters, doors, locks, and barriers, essentially the wall types that are involved. Access control, it covers that it's supposed to restrict access to SCI cleared personnel only unless escorted. For acoustic security, that's intended to prevent audio leaking from the perimeter. Technical security, prevent electronic surveillance, signal interception. I mentioned this is that TSCM and the Tempest aspects here that the tech spec addresses. Construction and modifications, pre-approval required for new builds or major changes. This is something that historically a lot of agencies or departments got themselves in trouble where they said, hey, we're going to build a SCIF, and they never got the right people involved in that SCIF, and they spent, the millions of dollars to get their facility built to SCIF standards, but because an AO and the CSA wasn't fully involved in that project, they end up not getting the space accredited. So before any kind of new build occurs or tenant improvement project occurs, in order to get that space accredited and operational, that CSA will have to be involved in that project. So again, the tech spec is establishing that. Compliance and oversight, we mentioned earlier, regular inspections and adherence to security policies is going to be an important component for that space to get accredited at the end of the day. Here's some observations on my part and my experience with some of my involvement with these type of projects and the implementation of the tech spec. The tech spec does not address all construction-related issues. There's a lot of gray areas in the tech spec. And so your project may present a unique or a challenging construction problem, or it could be an environment in which there's a construction problem that you may look for the answer on what does the ICD 705 require in this situation. There's a high likelihood the tech spec does not address that situation. And so the ICD 705, the way the policies are written, there's a heavy reliance upon some of those important stakeholders, the AO, the CTTA, the SSM, that the process to be able to work has to have their involvement and collaboration with them sometimes. So you want to make sure that they're on board with how you plan to address a construction problem in your construction environment or scenario, and making sure that the security standards are met. But again, if you get creative with it and you don't get their involvement, and then you try to get the space accredited and they look up and they see something that looks funny to them, and again, if they weren't involved, it could create delays or slowdowns, or even possibly not getting the space accredited. So it's important that you have their involvement, especially in those gray areas where the tech spec just isn't either clear or just doesn't mention it. Another aspect here is the implementation of the stated requirements. Sometimes it's very, very rigid. Other times I've been surprised at how flexible they could be, where even though the text says thou shalt, I've seen some projects say, we're not going to do that. And if that's coming from the AO and they're going to accredit the space, they can do that. So again, it's sometimes surprising how flexible they can be with these spaces. But on the flip side of that, also, it's sometimes surprising of how rigid they could be. An example of that would be in the tech spec, there are wall types, wall type A, B, or C, and the tech spec says these are recommended wall types. Well, you could have an AO that says they see that as very black and white, and they expect the design and the construction to look exactly like the details and the wall type that are identified in the tech spec, leaving little wiggle room for a unique construction environment that you're trying to build a wall in. And so again, there's some differences from project to project that could present some challenges there. Some other important policies I'll just briefly mention here that would be covered in future modules here of the overall course, but important policies nonetheless. 32 CFR Parts 2001 and 2004. This is considered the NISPOM. DoD Manual 5105.21, this is the SCI Administrative Security Manual for the DoD. It goes into more detail and more information about the protection of SCI for the DoD. The DoD Manual 5205.07, this is the SAP Security Manual. UFC 4-010-05. This is the SCIF and SAPF planning, design, and construction. So this is particularly going to be applicable if your facility is a federal facility. Let's say NAVFAC is involved. This UFC is most definitely going to be a set of policy that you would need to be aware of and follow for your ICD 705 project. The best practices guideline for architectural radio frequency shielding. This is a document that is mentioned specifically in the tech spec, and it is an important document. It was created in 2010, so it's a little outdated. There are some sections in there that are no longer applicable, or they AOs or CTTAs won't accredit a space based off of certain things that were in that document previously allowed, but nonetheless, it still is a very important document that is followed. There's some other CNSS documents that are a part of ICD 705 projects that you would need to be aware of. And then there could also be policies, every CSA, say the CIA or the NRO, they may have specific security policies that are unique to their agency. That would need to be followed, and you would need to be aware of if they have them. Where we are today with ICD 705, so I mentioned reciprocity as a key component for ICD 705. Again, that intelligence sharing being a main component for the set of standards, allowing for various IC elements to share that information. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of lacking coordination for the use of these spaces. One of the reasons for that is because of the diverse security cultures of these agencies. Sometimes they're slow to adopt the uniform standards, or they implement the uniform standards a little bit differently. As an example, I was involved in a multi-story facility that had multi-stories, and it was a very large facility. It had multiple programs, multiple agencies, and at the beginning of the project, they tried to come together, but they could not agree on how certain things were going to be implemented. So that facility ending up having over 60 individually accredited spaces, where the intent of ICD 705, a broad interpretation of that would be they would be able to have one SCIF perimeter and then have compartmented areas for those various programs or various agencies. And yet, again, the way that they chose to implement it was individual rooms were owned and accredited individually, and so every one of those spaces, even though they could share a wall between one IC element to another, they each had their own specific security requirements, their own security features, and it was a challenging build because of that. Key for success is to know the standards and to follow the process. Again, you could have security folks that say, "Oh, well, I did this over here on this one project last year, and so this is going to be a requirement here." Well, it may or may not be, and so it's important for whatever level of involvement that you may have in an ICD 705 project to know these standards, know the requirements, and at least be able to raise your hand and say, "Is that really a requirement here?" And find that out. And again, to follow that process, particularly as it relates to the accreditation, it's important to follow the process in your project. Well, hopefully that will be helpful to you guys. If there's any questions, it looks like we have a little bit of time left. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I don't see any questions in the chat, so it looks like everybody was hanging on your every word. So let's open it up for questions that anybody may have at this time. Feel free to come off mute. You don't need to use the raise hand feature unless we've got several people talking at once.
Riveting information, I know.
Well, I can ask one. I know DoD and Department of Energy use different programs with like Q clearances and that sort of thing. Does DOE follow the same standards for SCIFs and that sort of thing that DoD follows?
Yeah, DOE is kind of one of those players that have been slow to implement ICD 705. The DOE, they still have the very same requirement for any information that's going to be stored, processed, all that kind of stuff. Everything that we discussed that is a requirement for an ICD 705 space, the DOE is supposed to follow. But again, this is probably, in my experience, the DOE has been the agency that has been the slowest to implement these policies. So they are required to do so. In my discussions with other DOE stakeholders over the last year, I've heard that there's a big push for making sure that these projects are following ICD 705, keeping them up to the standards. And so, again, they are set to these requirements. How they implement them, hopefully they'll be better about implementing them according to the policies.
Hey, Daniel. This is John Fern out in Hawaii.
Hey, John.
Just one thing real quick, and I suspect you've run into this before, so maybe looking for your words of wisdom. So we did a number of secure builds overseas in Northeast Asia and worked with one of the three-lettered agencies. And so we got into this situation on pretty much all of the preferences for how they wanted the secure space to be built. And so the AO would weigh in on decisions on, the wall types and everything that you alluded to earlier. And the challenge, and this is just a word of caution, but I also wanted your input on it, is that just because the AO says this is the way you need to do this, we still have a contract with, in this case, the federal government that said this is what your scope is. So there's that closing of the loop that can be time-consuming and sometimes a little bit of a challenge. And so I don't know if you found any success in following a certain procedure to ensure that you don't get crosswise with the AO while you're trying to make sure that you're doing everything in accordance with the contract.
Yeah, I can't say I've identified a specific process. I would say an important, I don't know if principle is the right word here, but particularly with ICD 705 projects, one of the things that if you're not familiar with, that level of involvement that the AO and contract and all this kind of stuff, that it's ICD 705 introduces that layer of evaluation and inspection and approvals that is just maybe a little bit outside of the normal course of a commercial construction project. And so what can happen, it's the schedule constraint that happens. And so if a project at the very beginning when the schedule is being created realize or understand some of these the communication delays that can happen and some of the contractual negotiations that can start happening because of requirements getting imposed, where it's somewhat common where you could be midway through the project and all of a sudden become aware of a requirement that you didn't know was a requirement, and now the AO is saying you got to do this. All the various stakeholders that then have to get involved in implementing that requirement. So being able to establish a schedule that has a little bit more breathing room in it from the get-go than trying to be so tight, again, like thinking that this is going to be a typical commercial construction project. That would be my recommendation, is trying to think through that evaluation process at the very, very beginning.
Thanks, Danny.
Yes, sir.
All right, we've got just a few more minutes. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? All right. And Daniel, can you remind everybody how to reach out to you? Obviously, they can get in touch with me. I can put them in touch with you. Do you mind sharing your email address for any additional questions that come up later?
Sure. Yeah, I wish I would have created a slide that would have had my information up here for everybody, but D Garcia, DGARCIA at PSC, Paul Sam Charles dash consultant.com. So again, D Garcia at pscconsulting.com.
Awesome. I put that in the chat for everybody too.
Right, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yeah, feel free. I realize nobody had, or there weren't very many questions, but if y'all have any questions that stemmed from what was discussed today, feel free to reach out. Part of our services that we do, I mentioned we do this education course as a part of a 3-day course. We also provide consulting services during design and construction. And so, yeah, feel free to reach out if you'd like our services or interested in that scope. Or interested in our class. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. I appreciate you bringing us this information.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to the team.
Of course.
Thanks.
Everyone have a fabulous day. It was great to have you here.
Thank you.